Welcome, fight fans. I'm excited to talk to these special guests today. We have former WWE, MMA fighter, ambassador, commentator.
I cook sometimes, clean up sometimes. I do absolutely everything.
Alberto Del Rio.
Yeah,
He has many names.
What's
Thank
up,
you for sitting
brother?
down. Also,
I don't know if you can see the guy on the end over there. I don't
Campbell
know.
McLaren, like the car.
I'm here, like the car.
And, I want to jump into this right away. I mean, when UFC is brought up, and the people who started it, the Gracies are always mentioned. But we sit with a gentleman that actually started the UFC 25 years ago. Obviously, it's a huge company now. How do you feel about how big it is and that you're not a part of it? How did that time in your life when you, I guess, weren't
Is the whole interview going to go like this? Like, how do I feel not being part of it? That's a great start. Am I allowed to curse on this show? Because that's fucked up. He's starting with that. He's starting with that. No, here, okay, look, here, it bothers my wife more. Right, because the UFC is valued at $4.5 billion now. But I think what's happened in building out Combate Americas, which is coming up on 3.5 years old, and we're doing exceptionally well, I do feel this is more what I was meant to do with Combate. Because I think there's a social purpose to Combate that was never there with the UFC. Right? And I think the purpose is about lifting people up, giving people an opportunity, seeing a new type of fighter, bringing the sport to a next generation of fans. You know, the UFC fans right now, the average age of the UFC fan is 47 years old. Our average age is 27. So I feel, when I started Combate, I went out to see Lorenzo Fertitta and Dana White, because they're very powerful guys. And I said, this is what I want to do. And they both said, we're not doing a good job reaching Hispanic fans, so God bless.
Why is that?
I think it's the DNA of the sport. Right? I think when I started the UFC, it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with the Gracies and American Olympic and college wrestlers who tended to be white guys with the necks like this and the smushed up ears. So really the sport grew up with grapplers that were learning how to strike. You know, I'm happy to be here. I will let him talk at some point. But I'm happy to be here because I remember how much I like boxing. And it's great to hear you guys, because I do very much like boxing. I like MMA better because I started it, right? But it's not. But if you think about the UFC, you've got grapplers that learn how to strike. That's why you see these big, ridiculous punches in the UFC, right? Like where it's coming from, like death from above, right?
I'm glad an MMA fan acknowledges that.
What Conor McGregor can punch. There's a couple guys that really know. Do you ever look? Here's head movement in the UFC. Right? You never see anyone, doing this. So the UFC was grapplers that learned how to punch. Combate, because boxeo is the martial art of Mexico. All my guys come in, they know how to punch, right? So they're punchers that are learning the jiu-jitsu. Right? And so what we say for us, MMA means much more action, or mucho más acción. Our fights end in finishes in the first round. Our fights are more stand-up fights. There's just much more action. Right. It's more fun to watch for the new fan.
Well, I'm a firm believer that if you have the talent and you start something and you're not actually a part of it anymore, you have that talent, you can start something else again. And I believe that this is going to be great. But where did that idea, you're welcome, where did that idea come from? This whole new thing, like where did it come from?
Well, I did, if there's any super hardcore MMA fans.
You can talk to us. I'm not going to talk to them.
No, I want to do this.
I love the camera.
Just like this.
He loves the
camera. I actually want to go in front of it. Yeah. So I did a show many years ago called The Iron Ring. And it was...
For one season. It was a
one season, but it killed. T.I., right? Ludacris. I don't know if you guys are hip hop fans. Little John.
Nelly.
It was a great.
We're from Brooklyn.
Yeah, it's all right. So it was a great cast, and a guy who couldn't sing named Floyd Mayweather. And at this time that I did the show, the UFC had as many black fighters as America had black presidents, whiit at the time was zero, right? Wow. So what we did was really come in and sort of mix all that up.
But did the people that work with you at the UFC, were they opposed to that? Like, did they like the narrative that the UFC was pushing? Did they fight you?
No, you know, what the UFC says that they are the world-class version of MMA, right? Like the NBA, the NFL, whoever is the best fighter is who the UFC is going to put in. They have the best fighters under contract that are 25 to 35 years old. Okay. They just do. If you're going to go start a basketball league or the baseball, anything, the best fighters are already signed, right? So what we're doing at Combate is we go for the younger guys. So I'm looking for the babies, the puppies, the new guys. So I think our athletes are the athletes you're going to look to in the next 3 to 5 years.
So are these all Hispanic athletes, or
tell them our slogan?
Broadcast
it's not all Hispanics. I mean, we always say this, or my boss and friend always say this. I mean, it doesn't matter about your nationality. If you have the talent, you have a spot in the company. Oh, okay. You just have to fight like a Mexican.
We want to see.
But it's not we're calling it that way, fight like a Mexican. We even started a campaign on social media that goes like that, fight like a Mexican, but it goes beyond the passport or your nationality. It's about what moves you to fight, what inspires you to fight, what's the reason why you're doing whatever you're doing. It doesn't have to be fighting. It could be whatever you do in your life,
right.
but what moves you to do or to get to the next level.
Fighting like a Mexican.
Did you start that before Triple G started calling himself Mexican style?
We got it first. We did it first.
Well, he didn't fight like a Mexican in his last fight.
No, he did not at all.
Canelo actually did.
Yeah, Canelo did a fantastic job, and you know, I felt really happy about the result of the fight because unfortunately we had a lot of people in Mexico criticizing Canelo, and I was like, hey, you mother, you guys are criticizing Canelo more than what from whatever Triple G is was criticizing Canelo. It's ridiculous.
Alberto, how did you go from wrestling, right, which is a sport where, I mean, supposedly it's fake, but there's so many wrestlers that can't walk nowadays. They always complain about how many injuries, to being in a cage or in an octagon fighting. I mean, because it's a brutal sport. What made you want to make that transition?
Well, it was actually the other way around because I started with amateur wrestling in Mexico. I was part of the national team for many years. I started since I was 8 years old, and I was competing all over the world, Central American champion, Pan American champion, and then because my grandfather was a wrestler, my dad, my uncles, and I mean, it's like the family business. I became a pro wrestler. And then I went back to MMA because the money was horrible in pro wrestling in Mexico at the time. I was making $50 per match.
That's more than what we make here. What you talking about?
I don't believe it, brother. I see your watch and what you're wearing. But the money wasn't good at all. So I had Mr. Saeki from Deep Promotion in Japan. Okay. And he called me and he was like, hey man, will you fight the Japanese champion for $25,000? I was like, man, if you pay, you're gonna give me $25,000, I'll take a boat to go to Japan and I will destroy your Japanese champion. Thank God he didn't take my word on the boat part, but I did go to Japan and I ended up winning in the first round and stuff. And then I was like, hey, you know what? I think I'm gonna continue doing this. The money's pretty good, and I stayed there. I stayed in the MMA sport for 5-6 years, and then that's when WWE found me in Japan. They were touring in Japan, and my good friend John Laurinaitis. John, thank you for everything. He found me in Japan. Yeah, he is. I know he is. They all are watching this. They're always watching Alberto. And what I'm saying, especially what I'm saying, right? And he found me there, and then he was like, hey, man, why don't you come and join us with WWE? And, well, the rest is history with that company. And then I found the right place for me in this company. And I'm saying this from the heart, not only because he's my boss, but he's more my friend than my boss. They've been, Campbell and everybody in the company, they've been with me in the good ones, bad ones, worst ones, excellent ones. Yes. That's family, a real family in this company. And now the company is doing fantastic. They're supporting Mexican, Latin talent. But here in Combate, we're doing it. Like the 70% of the flavor in this company is Latino, is Mexican, and like Campbell was saying, it's just we're creating our own fighters. This is like they do in the soccer leagues, where they go and they find the talent all over the world. They find them young and then they build them to the top.
Or what boxing does, right?
And
Like
boxing,
boxing has a great farm system, right? And so all we do is we kind of go down the food chain, if you will, and find the guys and girls before they're ready for the UFC, groom them and bring them, and we're keeping them, right? They're not going to go to the UFC. But we're looking for younger, hungrier fighters.
You're a feisty guy. I think maybe it's a Philly upbringing.
It's the
that's
Philly
a
upbringing.
city.
But if you know anything about Scotland, like I go a lot. My whole family's there. I was there summer before last, and someone in the store said, "How are you doing?" I said, I've got a bad attitude and a chip on my shoulder. And the woman said, "You're in the right country." So I thought, okay, so that's it. No, look, I am feisty, but I'm happy feisty, right? We're having a great time with this. This really is a blast. And the thing I like about Dazn is, if you're a Spanish speaker, Spanish fight fan, you probably know about Combate. We're beating everybody. We're beating the UFC in Spanish in the U.S., Mexico, and Spain, in the world. Yeah. We're on ESPN throughout Latin America. We're on Gol in Spain, which is where the UFC is, and the big soccer network. Wow. And we're on Univision here, so it's a broadcast network in the U.S., but it's in Spanish. Yeah. What our new deal with Dazn has done is allow us to now reach English-speaking fans. Yeah. So that's super cool.
This country, Spanish is a second language, right? So don't you feel like you still have to cater to those that don't speak English and that love the sport?
Absolutely, but America's changing, by the way. Right. Maybe not as fast as some of us want, but something like 80% of Hispanics under 18 speak English. So it kind of depends what generation you are. Yeah. Sometimes the grandparents speak no English, the parents speak English and Spanish, and the kids only speak English. Yeah. This country's a great country, all the different types of people that have come in. So, but yes, Univision is Spanish. We're going to keep doing Spanish. Okay. DAZN's got the English. It doesn't matter.
I thought you were bringing everything to DAZN.
We could do it in Persian, because when you watch our fights, we just got back from Guadalajara. We had 12 fights, 10 finishes, 9 first-round finishes.
I love that.
That is awesome.
My boss is doing the cursing, and I don't have to do it.
this is gonna take off, and I think what's gonna happen is you might see Dana White with a "Make the UFC Great Again," make MMA great again. You know what I'm saying?
I love it. Thank you, brother.
Awesome.
Thank you for saying that.
And you're a commentator, right? You call the fight. So who's taking your spot? Calling a fight when you're in the ring.
I want to be in the ring, punch that motherfucker down.
Alberto moves in. I move in.
I mean, in this company, we do whatever it takes to take the company to the next level, to a place where we think we know the company deserves to be. We have something amazing going on in our hands. Yeah.
Campbell, where do you see Combate Americas in 5 years?
Well, good question. I think we're a $1 billion company by then. I think our aim is to be the #2 sport for Hispanic sports fans in the world. And soccer's #1, right? So I think we can move into that #2 slot. But I think, we're doing a lot of things, like we're doing 5-minute fights. We do championship fights as 3 rounds. We're really geared at a young audience. Like I said, our average age is much younger. Right. Let's get to it. And people watching everything on their phones now. So we want to do fast, furious, bring it on, fight like a Mexican, which is a great way to look at it. Yeah. And we incorporate a lot of entertainment. It's for us, it's a party, right? Yes. And we think it's very different. We have dancers. We had in Texas, we had a mariachi band do the American national anthem. Right. That was very cool.
That was super cool.
In Phoenix, we signed 10 inductees into the U.S. Army. U.S. military is 1/3 Hispanic, by the way, right? So we had 10 guys joining the Army, came into La Jaula, and we signed them into the Army.
I love that.
Then you know what? The octagon was taken, right? Because I trademarked it for the UFC. I couldn't use the octagon again, and it was...
Not that you're angry, though.
Not that I'm pissed. Arnold Schwarzenegger suggested the octagon shape because Conan the Barbarian fought in a stone octagon. So that's where the octagon... But then when I heard the Spanish word, La Jaula... I mean, it sounds like a monster movie. It's like La Jaula. It just sounds cool.
Would you do
Only
a
with my
match
lips.
against Dana White?
No, he'd kick the shit out of me.
I'm excited about Americas, Combate Americas. I agree with Barack. I think it's going to be huge. And
thank you, guys.
I mean, you're a great personality as well. I did a lot of research on you before today. So, I mean, we're looking forward to the next show. Can you talk about that before we go?
Well, we're in Monterrey next week.
We're in Monterrey next week, then Copa Combates. That's bigger than the Super Bowl.
You guys should come to that. The Copa Combate, it's 8 fighters from 8 different countries.
Are you going to have our ringside seats available?
Yeah, you're going to be inside
absolutely.
in the corral.
If that's a serious question, you will be my honored guest if you come. You really will. We're going to have an interesting group of folks. So we're going to have an interesting group. You should, if it's possible, and you could come out.
Let's talk to the high-ups at the zone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Get them flights going. I want to experience that.
So you remember the way the UFC started, it's an 8-man tournament. So you have to win 3 fights in one night.
Right. I remember
so
that.
it's 4 guys, 4 fights, 2 fights, 1 fight.
But Rob,
same night.
You're a mixed martial artist. I mean,
I might have to sign on.
I'm
I might have to sign
trying
on.
to get this guy to fight.
I don't know.
All right, well, listen, you guys don't want to miss this. Combate Americas.
December 7th on Dazn.
And Alberto Del Rio. Hakim Barack, only on Dazn.